All right, welcome back to another quick commentary video of drawing styles. This is a slightly different project from the other videos that I've done so far. This is a industrial design kind of interior visualization project done for a design client. So this style is more of an old school rendering style where I've done line work on pen and paper using traditional media and then scanned that line work in, and what I'm recording here is the process of rendering the forms and adding color and texture and stuff. So the target audience for this kind of a drawing is more of an architectural or industrial design client who wants to see some very specific information about how these forms and surfaces are built and delineated. It's less about creating a mood and an atmosphere and more about really explaining the forms. So that's why the more kind of heavy line work is important to really explain what's going on with the structures and the design. This recording of the drawing has been sped up 4 times, so it's all happening in fast motion as with all of my other recordings. But just in terms of the logistical details of this project, I have about 4 hours of time budgeted to do this rendering, and I've already spent the first 2 hours coming up with the general forms and shapes of the designs. The client gave pretty specific direction about what they wanted to see, but it was up to me to actually design the shapes, and then I had to lay out the perspective by hand and do all the line work, and that whole process of design and layout already took about 2 hours to complete. So now I have about 2 hours of budgeted time left to do all the coloring and rendering work. And unfortunately, part of my recording got lost, so you saw the video sort of skip ahead where some parts had already been rendered out. That's just somehow the file got corrupted or something, so that part got skipped. But you can see that in contrast to a more kind of comic book or photorealistic style, everything here is a little bit more of a caricature or of a highly abstracted interpretation of forms. Like all of those corners on the table are rendered just a little bit more. Like the difference between the top surface and the sides of the table is very intensely delineated. So those forms, those corners are really turning very sharply, more than what you'd probably see if you actually just took a photograph of a real table. And the same thing with that framework above there, that black framework. It's all just made a little bit more intensely cartoony in its rendering of the forms, and that's partially just because I have such a short amount of time to complete this drawing, so I'm really making everything very quick and gestural, and also just because it's part of the style. Like the client wants to look at this and get like a very quick impression. They want to get an idea that this is just a study or a loose early stage of the design. They don't want to feel like I've spent hundreds of hours on this drawing, and then if they say, well, actually we want to do something different, they feel like a huge amount of budget has been wasted. These are really more just quick studies, and if the client doesn't like it, it's not a big deal to just toss it and start over. So I want to just create a very loose, sketchy style to all of this stuff. And another thing that you will notice if you really look at this drawing very closely is that the perspective is just a little bit distorted. There's a very slight indication of what looks almost like a fisheye lens, where all the vertical lines are not perfectly vertical. They're all sort of bent in space a little bit. You can especially see that in the corners of the drawing. And I'm doing that for a very specific reason, which theoretically gets very complicated, but basically the idea is that the way the human eye perceives space is quite a bit different from what you would get with mechanical perspective, or the human act of perceiving space is doing different things than what would be happening in a camera or on a sheet of paper. So the corners of the drawing, I like to distort them and make it look a little bit more like a fisheye lens, because there's just like, the human peripheral vision is taking in all sorts of stuff around the corners that a camera would not see. So I like to kind of recreate that experience of seeing space as if you're actually standing in the space, and as a result, I'm slightly cheating. I'm putting more information there than what you would really see if you took a photograph, let's say, with a 50mm lens or something like that. So again, my choice of viewpoint and my rendering style are all just a little bit more of a caricature than what you would see if you took a photograph of this real scene, or if you did a 3D rendering of this scene, because I'm trying to mimic the experience of perceiving reality as if you're actually standing in the space, and what the human eye and brain interaction does to perceive space is a whole different ball game from what actually happens in a drawing. So I'm sort of taking a lot of liberties with what's really accurate. Like I would suspect that someone in the Renaissance doing classical mechanical perspective would probably cringe at this drawing, because everything is just a little bit warped from what actually is technically correct. So you've seen that I've laid out most of my shapes and colors now. The rest of this drawing is mostly going to be just about making the mood or the impression feel right. So I think what's happening right now, if you look at this drawing just as an overview, is there's a whole lot of stuff going on, but it's hard for the viewer to really focus on like, where should the eye settle, where should I look first, how should I organize this information that I'm seeing. And I'm going to go back in and create more of a hierarchy of information. And what you're seeing right now is I'm reducing the intensity of all the detail in that table. There's so much wood grain and shininess and sparkles and zings going on all over the place that it's becoming too busy, and I'm flattening that table out a little bit and reasserting just the simple planes of that surface. And now I'm putting in a haze, a sort of atmospheric perspective, or a fake atmospheric perspective, where I'm just, again, making that table jump to the foreground and everything else is starting to recede into the drawing. And again, that's creating a narrative of perception. The eye is going to jump onto that table, which is what the client wants to see. The whole purpose of this drawing is to present the client with the design of that table and the chairs, so the eye needs to rest there first, and then all the other stuff like those shelves and the people and that interior space all need to start to drop back into the drawing, and you definitely want to indicate that those things are there, but they really need to become less important. And everything else right now is just kind of adding little details, mostly just to make the drawing kind of sparkle. But all of these things that I'm doing here don't really add anything to selling the design. It's just sort of to make the drawing look a little bit more flashy. And I'm pretty much done with it. This in total took roughly about 2 hours to do, and shouldn't take any more time than that, because these kind of drawings typically, the client's going to look at it for maybe a minute or so, and then its purpose has been served. There's no reason for anyone to look at it ever again, so there's no point in putting a huge amount of time into these drawings. They should be very sketchy and loose, and not only will this drawing only be looked at for a very short amount of time, but also the client should have a great deal of, they should feel very free to say, no, we don't like this, let's start over. And they should feel very free to feel like they haven't spent a huge amount of time on this drawing, and they're going to get nervous that they're burning through time and budget on something they didn't like. If this drawing were done super tight and very detailed, I've sometimes heard clients say, like, wait, are we already building this? Like, has the ship already sailed? We want to change stuff. We want to make some revisions, but we feel like it's too late now that you've already, people are already swinging hammers somewhere and building this thing. And I want to keep this sketch very loose and gestural, so that the client really feels like they're still part of the design process, that they're just looking at these quick shots of ideas, and they feel very comfortable being able to still make changes and not get too hung up on the details. So this is a very typical sort of phase 1 design process sketch. If this design were approved, it would typically get sent to a 3D renderer, and they would do like a photorealistic rendering of this to really nail down all the details and the textures and everything. And then it would go into shop drawings to actually get built. But my part of the project is done, and this would then get handed off to other people in the production pipeline. So I hope that was helpful, and hope you got a few ideas and tips from this video, and I will see you next time. All right, take care. Bye.